All right, guys, welcome back to the Establish the Pass podcast presented by ClutchPoints. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan. We continue in this off-season in the NFL. And, Dillon, as we always say, there's always something to talk about. Apparently, there are a few quarterbacks out there that still have some decisions to make. At least that's what I've heard. A few high-profile quarterbacks still have some choices to make about where they're going to play next season. But there's also a lot of discussion on social media the past couple of days about win totals because DraftKings has released their win totals for NFL teams for the 2023 season. And I think, setting the over-under on the number and all these. And maybe, Dylan, it's just because I've done a lot of betting during the NCAA tournament, and I'm really kind of starting to look ahead at some NFL totals now, and I'm feeling like I'm on a hot streak here, a heater, as you would say. And I start to look at some of these win totals, and it is always fascinating because, again, we're saying this before the NFL draft. There's still big free agency moves, as we kind of hinted at, quarterback-wise, that could determine a lot here. But I do think it's at least interesting to look at these numbers where they're initially set at, and then kind of see where things go from there because, as you and I were talking before we started recording, some interesting teams that are towards the top that 2 years ago probably would have never been in that discussion. Teams towards the bottom that 2 years ago probably would have never been in that discussion. But it is interesting to see where teams are at here as we kind of head into April.
It reflects the shift of a lot of franchises' fortunes over the years, especially kind of in 2022. You saw teams like the Rams and the Packers, and we know what's going on in Green Bay and the impending trade that last time we talked was it was right before I think Aaron Rodgers came out and said it was happening. It's going to happen at some point. But yeah, there are teams also, like you said, at the top that just things that's the not for long. It's what the NFL stands for, not National Football League. As much as it's an adage that people say all the time, it is true to an extent. It is not a sport that is made to have players and organizations last with the way the salary cap is constructed. It wants parity. The league is getting it over the years, but there are some teams that have managed to stay at the top. It helps when you have a Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, the Chiefs are going to be one of the leaders here at this look at this conversation. But I think also a smart move by the books to put these out before the draft. It gets people, they're going to really be placing major bets based on like a pick that who knows if the guy's actually going to be contributing in year one. But hey, people are going to throw down and think this is the difference between us going from 7.5 or 7 wins to 8. There's also just a lot of, you can tell though at the same time that these are still initial totals because there is from the 9.5 to 7.5 range covers more than half the league. So I mean, it just shows that there's teams that they're not quite sure. Everyone's there's a group in the bottom, group in the top, but there are quite a few franchises in the middle that we're still shaking out what they're going to be. Obviously, you're hinting at the Lamar Jackson situation that has only escalated this week with him revealing that he made a trade request from Baltimore and basically openly talking about everything from his injuries, some of the decision making, not playing some games last year, basically anything you could have possibly wondered about that we've been talking about or you've been reading about somewhere else. He's discussed, and that also plays a role in terms of where the Ravens are here, but also any team that could get Lamar. We'll see. The Falcons today said, I believe Arthur Blank said that they're going with Desmond Ridder as their starting quarterback, but things could change. Plenty of teams have said they're going to start one QB or one guy's going to be their under center in week one, and then things change really quickly. So we'll see. It's still kind of in flux, but yeah, it is fun to look at these win totals, and it does reflect in most cases how I feel about teams. But then there are other teams that I think might be a little high in my opinion, but it might be kind of based. I've been trying to look at. I don't love looking at strength of schedule based on last year's record. I just don't. You see how quickly things flip for teams like the Rams, obviously, are one that sticks out, but just a lot of franchises that, who they are one year is not necessarily what they're going to be the following one. So I try to kind of look off projections, and in this case, it kind of helps to look at like win totals almost as a barometer of strength of schedule. So maybe that is a factor that's bumping up some franchises we'll get to that I think are a little high on here, but nonetheless, not trying to be. Usually, we're pretty positive about these teams, and we like to have a positive outlook on where they're moving, and it's just I don't know about the Saints at 9.5. I like Derek Carr, but that's one that popped out to me.
Yeah, we'll get to some. We usually try to be positive, but I'm going to tell you, there's a couple teams I'm not going to be that positive on when we kind of pick out what our eye is kind of looking at here,
Yeah.
and what could be sort of the best bets. Again, if you're going to take the chance of making a bet on some of these win totals before the draft, which I would hesitate to do, but it's at least fun to discuss. All right, let's talk about two teams in particular right off the bat here. You just mentioned the Ravens. They're at 8.5. That's what their win total is set out. Obviously, all the Lamar stuff, we have no idea yet how that's going to play out. The trade request, what's going to happen. Will anything happen? We have no clue. So it's really hard to know because guess what? If Lamar gets traded, that team he gets traded to, their win total is going to change.
Yep.
And I don't know who it's going to be, but their win total will change. So you have to keep that in mind too. That's why I think you always hesitate on some of these, especially if it's a team that there is any possibility of a Lamar Jackson trade happening. If you can find a path to that, I would hesitate, in a certain sense. But then again, if you think, hey, this team's number is set at 8.5, and they may get Lamar, and that number is going to jump up to 10.5. Well, go ahead and bet that 8.5 right now. Then you'll be just fine. But so the Ravens are set at 8.5. The Jets are the other team I want to mention in this category because they are at 9.5 is where their win total is. Now again, that is probably under the assumption that they're going to have Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback. But both these teams kind of in limbo right now. We don't really know what's going to happen. In terms of when things get finalized, when trades happen, all that. But I think these are probably the two most intriguing ones out there. And as you said, they fall in the range of the gazillion teams who are in the 7.5 to 9.5 on these initial win totals here. Jets at 9.5, Ravens at 8.5.
Yeah, I think the Jets in 9.5 is assuming, like you said, that Rodgers is going to be there. If that was still up for grabs, maybe they'd be still tentatively with the belief that he could be going there more at 8.5. I think it's reasonable. It might be a little high, but I understand with the defense. If there's a reason to believe their defense is still going to be really good, as it was a year ago. I don't think they're going to have too big of a drop off, and they might even still be able to add. It doesn't sound like the amount of picks they're going to be giving up, especially in 2023, only a second rounder it looks like. So they're going to be just fine. I would, even though I still part of me it's still the Jets, but I'm like. And, Aaron didn't have his best season, obviously, but I think something about being revitalized by a change of scenery, something he's never had in his career, being back with Hackett and still having, a defense. It's just been a while since we've had a Aaron Rodgers-led team that's had a really good defense. Not many times in the course of his entire career has that occurred. Also, potentially, depending on Breece Hall's health and overall some of the health of the offensive linemen, as we've talked a ton about with this team and how important it can be to what they were as an offense early last season before it fell off later in the year. I think, there's a reason to believe that this team could – I'm not going to necessarily put them above the teams that are rightfully above them in these win total projections in their conference with the Jags, the Bills, Chiefs, and Bengals. But I think 9.5 firmly as a playoff team right in the mix with Miami. I think, assuming Aaron's there, I don't think that's crazy. But yeah, the Ravens, on the other hand, that one's just so hard to predict at this point. I would probably still take the over just based on how this team has performed. Even when Lamar's not out there, there's still a hard-nosed football team that has a lot of guys on defense that kind of coalesced last year well. They had a ton of injuries, obviously, in 2021. 2022, they came back, and we saw this. This team, when healthy on offense, still had one of the top rushing DVOAs in the league. Their defense, again, ends up being in the top, 7th by the end of the year. So I still would take the over, even with the. You might want to wait until he possibly gets traded away because then that number is going to drop lower, and I would still, that's probably my perspective. If Lamar gets traded, let's let that number drop to 7.5, whatever it's going to drop to, and then I'll still take the over because that's how much confidence I have in that organization to just figure it out. Even if I don't agree with how everything's been handled in the Lamar situation, I'm sure there's some details from both sides that are still not all out there and completely accurate. It's hard; you can't trust like one source on these things. Like everyone kind of has different takes on how these discussions go, but despite how this has all gone down with Lamar, I still think that this, in a tough division, to be clear, I think the Steelers we saw over the course of the second half of the season, they really came on well. The offense looked good enough with a really talented defense. we'll see what the Browns are with Deshaun for a whole season. We know what the Bengals were getting, even with some of the losses they had in free agency. They do add Nick Scott from the Rams and some other pieces on their defense to kind of make up for some of the losses. But it's a tough division, but I still think Baltimore, at the end of the day, is a 500-ish football team. So maybe I'm waiting, though, until that moves, because, yeah, obviously you get great value if you take the over now and Lamar stays, but that it doesn't. I'm not confident that that's going to happen at this point. As much as I was early in the offseason where I was like, they'll figure it out now. And I think the last time we talked about it, after a few weeks into the offseason, we're like, all right, maybe there's something more going on here between the player and this organization. It's not so much that the numbers are as big of an issue now as it is the hurt feelings and how the trust and what the relationship is between the two sides. It's interesting because it feels like at certain moments they both love each other, and then at other moments it's like it's not working out. It's been a long and winding road. I feel for Ravens fans, that have all, for the most part, very much supported Lamar. I think the conversation about where Lamar fits in with other teams is also a little ridiculous. He's become such a great passer. I think Steven Ruiz, who Lamar, now people are joking with Steven Ruiz that Lamar's his number one fan. He tweeted out some highlights of just throwing of Lamar, and it's like, yeah, this guy, we've seen it when he's healthy. It's not just the running. He doesn't have to be used the way he is, and he still can selectively play, but I think he'd fit into a lot of offenses. I think he's just a great football player, and I think he's, as a passer, has really improved over the course of his career. So I still want the Falcons to do it. I know they've talked about they're saying Ritter's their starter, but man, you talk about as I mentioned, I don't love doing the schedule thing based on last year's wins and like doing strength of schedule, but based on that, the Falcons do have the easiest schedule too. So that's a wide open division. It's not going to be nearly as tough as the AFC North is. So man, it would be so much fun, but we'll see where Lamar ends up. And for Ravens fans' sake, I hope it still is in Baltimore.
Well, looking at the rest of the AFC North again, where things are kind of at. Obviously, the Bengals are at the top of this list. They are tied with the Chiefs and Niners for the most kind of win total mark set initially here. 11.5 is the number for the Bengals. Then you've got the Browns at 9.5. Steelers also at 8.5 with the Ravens. So, like you said, you could play the guessing game if you want to like bet the over on a team like the Falcons or the Colts or any teams like that you see Lamar's name popping up with and rumored. But look, that may be a long list, and so you're kind of you're taking some risks there, knowing that you may think he's headed to one of these teams, and it winds up being just a complete wild card pick. And again, that team's number probably jumps up if Lamar is traded there, and so yeah, I just find that fascinating to kind of see what happens. But all those teams kind of projected in that near 500 or better range in the AFC North. So. We'll see what happens with that one. All right, let's get some of the negative out of the way here. Well, actually, here we can piggyback on this discussion. The Packers are 7.5 because we talked about Aaron Rodgers, and again, the Packers are in that same group with about 7-8 other teams that are set at 7.5. And I think obviously. They're an interesting one because now you look at kind of where that division's at, and as you and I were sort of laughing about before we hopped on, it's interesting to think the Lions are the team with the most projected wins, at least where the win total set at 9.5 in the NFC North, and the Vikings are at 8.5. The Packers are at 7.5, and also the Bears are at 7.5. So that becomes an interesting division now. I think when you look at. Again, the thought of Rodgers not being there, what the Packers can do moving forward. Again, we're just not used to seeing the Packers kind of in this spot, but here we are. And, again, you feel like you've got the Lions who are sort of surging. The Vikings should still be a pretty good team. I think, as I told you, I see a lot of optimism for the Bears, although I'm a little more hesitant than other people would be when it comes to going too far with the Bears just yet. But it is interesting to see the Packers kind of slotted either right around, teams or below those teams now, given where Aaron Rodgers is probably going to wind up.
Yeah, it's not where we usually find, for years and years, and even probably going back before we were old enough to be looking at these kind of things, going back to the early Favre era. Like, they're probably near the top of these lists in most cases over the course of the last 20, 25, 30 years. And now it's just a new reality. As much as I have hope for Jordan Love in spurts last year, I thought he looked pretty good, didn't look so good the year before, and the limited time, it's just we haven't seen him much. And it's a little different. It's not, the parallels between Rodgers and going back to Favre going to the Jets are there, but the parallels between Jordan Love and Aaron themselves and their college careers are very different, where they went, what kind of performances they had, and Aaron was a superstar in college. To be clear, he fell down the draft. It wasn't like a Jordan Love situation where it was kind of known he was going to be going late first round, early second. I still have hope for the guy, but I think there are some concerns overall about the roster, on defense in particular, but just offensive skill set wise, they have some really good, fun young players, and I think they're still the Packers. They still have good coaching. They're still an organization that I think I don't want to have too little faith in them, and it does help. In terms of, I believe they get the NFC South this year for their whole division set against another division in the conference, which isn't a bad year for that to be the case, unless Lamar's coming in to Atlanta. But assuming he's not, you're not looking at any of those four teams at this moment. I know Carolina has high hopes, and we'll see what they do at the quarterback position. C.J. Stroud looking like a potential there with some of the things that their coaching staff said to him at his pro day. But outside of that, I mean, they're scheduled, just their opponents. They get the AFC West. This goes for all the teams in this division, but they get the AFC West, which not as intimidating maybe as it looked ahead of last season with the way that the Broncos fell off. Obviously, we'll see where the Raiders are at. But yeah, the Chargers and Chiefs still tough games. They get them both at home. So I'm trying to look through where wins and losses come from, and it feels right. I might still take the under if I had to. Unfortunately, I think a 7-10 kind of season is where I, at the moment, feel like they're going to be, but I'd love to be surprised. I think it's great when having the Packers, one of the staple organizations, but it might be time for the Lions, and who knows? I mean, the Bears, like you mentioned, them being some people thinking they're a little low, right? You were saying, which at this moment, I think it fits because they still had so much work to do on defense. It's not even about and you made a good point about the receiving corps. Yeah, they add DJ Moore, but still have work to do. The offensive line played better. It was better as a run blocking unit. Still needs work as a pass blocking unit. I know they're working on that. But the defense, they add some players, but it's just so... I mean, they tore it apart. And then you saw at the end of last season, that's the reason they were losing games. It wasn't the offense, and it wasn't Justin Fields. They just had arguably the worst defense, and I think by metrics over the second half of the year they were the worst DVOA defense. It's just a lot to make up. But I think the Bears are rising. I think the Lions are the one that deserve their flowers at this point. I think they are, in my opinion, the best team in this conference. Yeah, even with still not with the way that Jared played last year, just the way that they've built this roster and they're continuing to build it and the culture that they have. I have a lot of confidence that what happened at the end of the 2022 season wasn't a fluke for Detroit. We talked about Minnesota in terms of their record just being way over the expected win-loss total based on some of their advanced metrics. They were barely beating some good teams. They were barely beating some bad teams. They were losing pretty badly to some pretty good teams. Things weren't perfect for a team that won, 12, 13 games last year. So I think Detroit at this point, they have an offense that I think is only going to improve running the football. They end up 5th in total offensive DVOA. I mean, the defense it needs to turn a corner. I think it will start to this year. So I have no problem with the Lions being 9.5. I'd probably, if I had to pick on it, I'd probably take the over. I think they're a 10-win football team. I know I'm getting myself in trouble here, but that's fine. I like rooting for some of these teams like Detroit that haven't had success. I mean, we saw they were just such a lovable team. It wasn't just from Hard Knocks. They have so many fun players and young players that are exciting, and obviously Dan Campbell's energy is infectious. But I thought Jared had a great year last year, and who knows, long term, it's still another conversation point at certain times this offseason. People have talked about if Detroit's going to possibly make a move up for a QB here at some point, if they're going to not wait until next year potentially. Are they getting too good where they're going to be out of that range where they can pick high or trade up to get a high pick? I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but I think it's kind of a situation where it doesn't, even if it's not Jared under center, if it's someone else, I'm so confident in what they've built around him. And we've seen that with some other organizations and teams. You don't always have to have the quarterback and then build around him first. So you can, figure it out and then drop a guy in and see how it works. I mean, San Francisco, not putting Detroit with obviously the defense is miles away from where the Niners are, but in terms of just a template of how you can build a roster with talent, draft well, fill out, be deep at a lot of positions, and ultimately find skill position players that are really talented. And Detroit's done that at receiver. They don't have Christian McCaffrey, but I think that they're building it the right way. So I'll take the over for them. I'm going to hold off on Chicago for a second, though. I agree with you that it might be that people saying this should be higher. I would if they were higher, I'd take the under. Unfortunately, I want the Bears to be good too. I love Justin Fields. I love watching, what that offense could be and thinking about what they might be able to do with more talent around him. But I just still have questions of where that defense is going to be. I think they might need a little more time to fill out that side of the roster. So 7.5 feels right to me. I think they're a 7 or 8 win team.
Yeah, that whole division is going to be interesting. I think to see how it plays out, because I think you've got a lot of questions. It's interesting that you got a lot of questions outside the Lions, and that's something that again we haven't said in a long time probably. So yeah, that is quite fascinating to look at that division in general. All right, let's just pick out some teams here that maybe catch our eye. I told you earlier, and again, let's go to the negative side of things here. The two teams with the lowest win total number that's set here is the Texans at 5.5 and the Cardinals at 5.5.
Yep.
I told you, I said that Cardinals 5.5. Maybe I may be going the under on that one because I don't. The Texans, I think because they play in the AFC South, anything can happen. Even though we are very clearly know that they are still behind, and I don't think one draft's going to completely change that. But the Cardinals are an interesting one because I'm just like I don't know what to expect from the Cardinals. New coach, no idea kind of what I guess things are going to look like on either side of the ball. In all honesty, like I think just trying to find that consistency with them, and they are still I think in a division that has the Niners. Their numbers at 11.5, as we mentioned earlier, they're tied with the Chiefs, Bengals for the most. You've got the Seahawks, I think are around 8.5, so they're in that range. Rams are at 7.5, so it's not, all things considered, it's not 3 or 4 years ago where you're looking up and everybody's probably at least a 10-win team, but it is one where the Cardinals, like I just don't have a lot of, I don't have a lot of positive momentum in them. And then there's another team that's near them, the Bucs, who are at 6.5, which we know, that's kind of a fall for the Bucs, given they won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, but we know Brady's retired now, and all the things, changes and such. It's just, I think to see the Bucs at 6.5, that's kind of an interesting one too. So.
Yep, I'm not surprised with Tampa. I mean, the quarterback is just such a question mark at this point. What you're really gonna be getting there, so that makes sense. And even in a division, the reason why it's still like I want to say they have a chance to get that is because the division, as we've talked about, isn't that great. They are playing, I believe, mentioning that they're going to be across the conference playing the Packers and the North, which isn't exactly the strongest division out there. I believe, they also get the AFC South. So, from Tampa Bay's perspective, there's a chance that they just find some wins because they're going to be playing some games that are going to be, the at my time, 10 a.m. on Red Zone, and you're not really seeing it much potentially on there. It's that kind of football, unfortunately, coming up for them. So we'll see. Still have some of the members of that Super Bowl team obviously there, but it's not the same as soon as you lose Tom, but also a lot of other guys that already were leaving the team. But looking at those first two teams you mentioned at the bottom, I mean, Arizona won 4 games last year. Yeah. I don't see how they are better yet, unfortunately. Well, they do have a top pick. We'll see if they get a Will Anderson. Things maybe at least start to have some intrigue, and you're excited for what they can start to build, but it's going to be a second. I think they're a team that clearly, and we don't even know if Kyler Wright is going to be healthy to start the year, or when he's going to exactly be back, and when he is, with some of the, with DeAndre Hopkins likely being traded, with just overall the status of that line and some of the players they did keep. But overall, it's just a team that, as we talked about, they drafted a lot of guys that weren't they're on defense in particular, that were somewhat positionless, but also just really athletic guys that just didn't have an exact role. So hopefully they'll figure that out. Hopefully they find, how to best utilize the talent that they do have. And maybe it looks better than what it felt like it was last season, because these guys weren't put in places to succeed. But I still have questions. I still would probably take the under there. I think they're 5-12. It might be the top of I think is going to happen. So they could completely prove me wrong. The Cardinals have done that in the past, but last year I was really down on them, and they proved me right then. And then Houston, I don't know. That one's a tougher one. I mean, clearly between the two organizations, you'd rather be in the spot that the Texans are in, right? Like, they, not just from where you're about to draft a new quarterback there, and depending on who it is, you still feel good about, regardless of who it is, what the team finally has done by getting DeMeco Ryans. What you feel like you don't have a coach that's just there as a lame duck that's going to be fired after a year or two, but in the last couple of years, just after one season, they have some talented players, but still, like you mentioned, it's still not like they filled. It's not like last year where we're looking at the Jaguars and we're like, all right, they can make a jump. We don't know for sure if they're going to. I didn't think, at least personally, they're going to be quite as good over the second half of the year as they were. But at least you saw the infrastructure kind of in place, and they had Trevor Lawrence. Now we'll see what that quarterback that they get here, how he does as a rookie. They still have, on the flip side, I'm mentioning the NFC North playing the AFC North, the Souths playing each other. That also means they're playing a pretty weak NFC South. So they're projected, at least based on last year's win totals, to have the third easiest schedule in Houston. Combine that with DeMeco Ryans coaching, with a quarterback that's going to be at likely at a much higher level than what, even though Davis Mills at times, 2021 looked pretty good. Things kind of came back to earth last year. So I think that's reasonable that they could go over 5.5. I don't know if I would bet it, but if I had to between these two, it's pretty clear which one I'm taking the under on and which one I would take the over on if I had to. Houston just feels like things could flip with an easy schedule to at least being like a 6-7 football team. I don't think it's out of the question in their division they have and the schedule they have and the coaching staff that they've now brought in.
All right, what others stand out? And again, we could go through all these. We were not going to, but what are some of the other ones that stand out? I guess just for me, looking down this list, the Patriots are at 7.5. I find them interesting because, again, I don't have a strong read one way or the other, but for some reason I think that could be a little bit low. But again, you're still banking on potential too there too. I mean, it's you're waiting to see if certain guys can take the next step and. So that's one that I've kind of got my eye on. You talked about the Falcons earlier. They're intriguing for a variety of reasons. They're at 7.5 too. Again, that's all dependent on kind of what happens there. You've got some of these teams at the top, which to me it's still wild to see the Jags in there at 10.5 with the Bills. Both numbers set at 10.5. Both the Jags, Bills 10.5. The Eagles, of course, who got to the Super Bowl, they're at 10.5 as well. I mentioned earlier the top three teams: Chiefs, Bengals, Niners, all at 11.5. On their number. So don't know if there's anything else that just completely stands out. You did mention the Saints earlier. I'm kind of with you on that one. I think that's high for me. That is probably one I'd put on my top 5 if I was going to circle a short list of going one way or the other. I don't know why that feels pretty high. I mean, I could see 7 or 8, but I don't know why. But 9.5, just to me, I don't know that I would go the over banking on the Saints being a double-digit win team. And again, there's a lot of ones like that, but any others that sort of stand out to you?
Maybe I'm underselling Derek Carr. Maybe he will, do enough with that team. I was just concerned the offensive line was from a age and health and a lot of perspectives on the way down. And I think Derek Carr, as much as he can do with a solid offensive line, a lot can go wrong when he doesn't. Just like any quarterback, but he's not a guy that's going to necessarily plug the holes the same way. If the holes in the ship aren't there, he's going to succeed well. So. I just don't know if the defense can keep maintaining the level it's still maintained over the last few years. So That's why I mentioned off the top. I think their 9-8 would be a great result in my mind for the Saints. I don't, there's a chance they get double digit wins, but I'm not
I think the
betting on
division
that.
may be part of
Yeah,
that because
it is
you
for
really
sure.
think
You're
about
right.
it, right? Because you got Falcons, Panthers, Bucks, and we just talked about kind of what the projections are for all those teams, and that's probably going to be my guess, right? Like, I'm trying to think if there's any others, but like I think that will be the division with the lowest probably overall wins if you're just
Yeah,
going 1 through 4. That's probably why the Saints are projected
100%.
maybe a little higher than you would think. So
You're right. Yeah, based on last year's schedule, the second easiest schedule. We'll see if that actually plays out. I think, yeah, playing again the AFC South, along with their own division, as you mentioned, all those kind of factors. Not the toughest of schedule. So, I think they will cobble together wins. It's just the double digit number that I had a hard time wrapping my head around. But you're right. It definitely could happen. I wouldn't say it's like a safe pick on it by any means. I think you mentioned the Patriots. That is one that I agree that I think as soon as you said that before we started recording, I was like, that is probably the one right here where I'd take the over for sure. I don't have any reason to believe they're going to be significantly worse football team. I mean I think they won 9 games last year, 8 games. I think they're probably still in that 8-9 range. Maybe they could get to 10 with the right things falling their way. I just don't see. Yeah, they're not like a perfect team, but they're still a solid team. They have a tougher schedule, so maybe that's kind of factoring in. But I think 8.5 is what I would have expected when we opened up these odds, not 7.5. And because of that, just maybe it's still too much trust in Belichick and the organization itself, and actually having an offensive coordinator now, and feeling a little bit better about what might be happening on that side of the football this season. I still think they have some good players, so. Yeah, I think I still have faith in Mac Jones. If I was Patriots fan, I understand the some of the hesitations and some of the things that, depending on, I guess some Patriots fans do love him, but kind of goes back and forth there on the opinion. I think he's still a solid quarterback with the right situation, can play well. So yeah, I agree. I think that's one that stuck out that I would take the over for sure on. I don't know if there's that one. I don't think that's like on the level of last year where we looked at. I think the first time we looked at these odds, I think they were at 8.5. It was the Eagles, and I remember us saying like that is the clearest cut. I didn't think they'd necessarily be a Super Bowl team, but I think that was like the clearest cut based on schedule, based on the roster talent and Jalen Hurts and what he'd done over the second half of the 2021 season. That was like a slam dunk that I'm still mad I didn't actually like go to Vegas and place a bet on. I don't know if there's a slam dunk right now. Maybe things will change over the course of the year. Some of the higher ones I would probably still feel pretty bullish on the Chiefs and Niners going over, despite some of how every team's going to go into those games, looking at them as their toughest battle. I think the Eagles still I would take again over on their number, even at 10.5. But looking at the other ones, slam dunks. I mean, I wish the Giants were 9.5 because I would say the under. I don't want to be a 2. I know over the course of the year, we went back through all our picks. I probably did pick against the Giants more than I should have. And I think Brian Dable has done a great job, and I think they have a really solid organization. But they have, I think, expected to be tied with the Patriots for the third toughest schedule. At the moment, based on last year's records, they faced a much easier schedule. They did beat some teams that early in the season we thought were good, and then by the end of the year, the Packers were like, "Oh, this isn't actually a good football team." I think at 8.5, that feels right, and so it's one that I was when I opened this, I was kind of like, I'm going to find where the Giants are, and I was hoping the odds makers would have it a little too high. I think they nailed it, kind of. I would other ones that stick out. I mean, the Steelers. I think there's something to the Mike Tomlin winning record thing, and I just like the trajectory of where they started going over the second half of the year. I don't think they're a perfect team. They still play obviously in a tough conference, but and a tough division. But I still think the Steelers they are right now 25th hardest schedule, so the 8th easiest. I guess that would be. I think that's a lot compared to last season. I think that their schedule is going to ease up, so I'd probably go over on Pittsburgh. That's one prediction I would kind of throw in there. But after that, man, I don't know. if you asked me a few weeks ago with the Rams at 7.5, I would have been like, all right, they can get back to 8 wins. Now I'm not so positive with the way that I think they're looking at 2024 as an organization. I know that Stafford is supposed to be fully healthy. I know that a lot of these guys that were injured last year are going to be back, and we'll see how the offensive line comes together. But I don't know. I mean, you trade away Jalen Ramsey. Man, I have a hard. That one's a tough one for me. Obviously I'm going to put my eyes onto the Rams for a second at least, but after that, I don't know if there's any others that. I mean, I feel pretty positively about the Chargers still being a 10-win football team. They're at 9.5 here, which is probably a good number to put them at. But I still think with Justin Herbert and still the talent that they're going to have, even if Eckler ends up being traded, I still think the Chargers are. And they're a couple pieces away on certain spots too on their roster, on defense in particular, but also along the offensive line, at right tackle, where you think that once they kind of plug these, and I think Herbert's going to come out with, ready to fire on all cylinders. I don't think he's the kind of guy that's going to let that collapse in the playoffs have the wrong kind of impact. I think he'll be just fine. So yeah, I think some overs for sure for me that I'd pick, like we were talking about the Patriots. I'd put the Chargers on there. I'd probably put the Steelers on there, and for unders, the Saints, despite what you mentioned, I think you made some good points on the reason why it's where it is. I'd still probably go under if I had to, and then the right in the middle there. I don't know about the Ravens, but I think the Raiders were one that you mentioned at the top a little bit before we started recording as an interesting one. People were saying that they're a little too low or a little too high on that one?
I think some thought they were a little too high. And I would probably be in agreement with that maybe. I don't know because I don't have a great feel for the Raiders. So I would probably stay away from that in all honesty. Like I don't have a strong read on it, but
yeah.
I don't know. They're just they're a mystery to me. Because it's look, I don't know what to expect, right? Like I know they have good players in different spots, but I just don't know overall what my expectations should be for this particular Raiders team.
My concern with them is that the fact they play 4 games against the Chiefs and Chargers at the start, right. Off the top. But then they also play a division that I think could end up having 4 above 500 teams in the AFC East. I mean, we're talking about the Jets possibly being over 9.5. The Dolphins aren't going anywhere. They just got Jalen Ramsey. Tua's healthy. They have Vic Fangio. I mean, they have a lot of positive momentum. The Bills are still the Bills, even after what happened in the playoffs, and the Patriots. So, I mean, they play all 4 of those teams, plus the Chiefs and Chargers twice. They get the Steelers. They have the NFC North, so not maybe as tough of a division, but there's not really a division I would look at as top to bottom in the entire NFC and say it's like that and insanely hard at this point. So I mean, it's a tough schedule in my opinion. So I think for the Raiders, if I had, like you said, maybe you stay away from it, but if I'm betting on it, if I have to go one way or another, I'm probably taking under. Unfortunately, I don't want to, but that's kind of where it is for them at this point. I tend to agree, I guess, in this case, with some, even if I'm maybe not as bullish on the Bears being way too high or much higher. I think they're in a pretty solid spot. I like where they're at. I might take the over there, but the Raiders, I'm sorry. Right now, I need to see it. I don't think that Jimmy Garoppolo is a better quarterback than Derek Carr. So what else in the roster has necessarily improved to the extent where you think they're going to have it all figured out? Maybe his chemistry with Josh McDaniels will come out and be evident, and they'll be able to do some things. But that's kind of my feeling. I think one that is maybe one of the hardest ones. Maybe that's a kind of a good question. Which one's like one of the more difficult ones? One of mine, and maybe for most people it won't be. It's the Browns. Maybe a lot of people see 9.5 and they're just going under. I think they have a chance to still be. I mean, at times last year you're watching them against some opponents, you're like they're just a few punchers plays away from having a much better record. They have projected to have the 7th easiest schedule next year. Deshaun's going to be there a whole year. No matter what you think of him. Do you think that we know what he did before when he was playing full seasons in Houston? If he's able to actually practice with the team throughout this whole time, building the entire offseason, I don't know. I think that's like one I really struggle with. I definitely stay away from. But are there any other ones that kind of for you are like where you just have no idea which way it could go?
I think the Seahawks are an interesting one to me because like I don't know why. That's just one that I initially, when I looked at the list, I looked at the Seahawks and said, I don't know. Like I don't know which way I would go on that because obviously kind of a breakthrough season last year. And then I think all the teams in the 8.5 to me are like, because it's that line, right? You're talking about a team that's either going to be over 500 or under 500, and it's just kind of, I think that line is always interesting. But when I looked at the Seahawks schedule, I think they've got, let's see, I think they play the AFC North. They play, I was trying to figure out what the other one they play is. I want to say it's
like they get the NFC East.
NFC East, okay, which is, again, that's a little bit tougher nowadays. So I think that's probably one that I don't have a great feel on. They've got to go to Dallas. They go to Baltimore. And I think it's because, I don't really know, at Baltimore, what's that going to look like, right? I don't know yet. I don't know what maybe the Rams are going to be. And I think you've got a lot of teams for the Seahawks that are in this range, like we talked about, of these 7.5 to 5, or 9.5 type teams. And so I feel like you got a lot of teams that go one way or the other. And again, I'm not saying I think the Seahawks are going to disappoint, but I don't know that I have a strong enough feeling on them to just completely go all in and say, oh yeah, they're a 10-win team, right? And so I think they're one that I'm just a little curious which way I would go on that one. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I think it's a good point with the schedule. The whole entire West, maybe their own division with the Rams and Cardinals being where they're at for the Niners and Seahawks. Maybe you look at those 4 games as looking pretty winnable. That Seattle has struggled more with the Rams historically than San Francisco. But yeah, after that playing the North is not going to be easy, regardless of whether Lamar's there. Like I said, I might wait on the Ravens to take the over if he gets traded because I still think they're a really good team. I mean, the whole AFC is ridiculous, but I think top to bottom, the North and the East for me right now, the South is the one exception, I guess. I still think the Jags, there's a reason they're at 10.5. It's not only that people think that they're going to be in that mix with those other teams in the conference, but it's mostly that they just are clearly the best team in that division right now. Whereas in the East and the North, it's those games on all across the board are all going to be really fun, especially if Aaron gets traded to the Jets. I mean, the consolidation of power in the AFC compared to the NFC, as we've talked about a number of times, is pretty nuts. So for a team like Seattle, it's like, yeah, they have an opportunity, but then they do have to play one of the tougher divisions in the entire league across conference. A bad draw there. And then do you have a little bit of, it's such positive regression. Do they have a little bit of negative? There's a reason I think they're at 8.5. I tend to think they'll go over that, but I don't feel great about it, so I agree. Yeah. That's probably one of the tougher ones also on this board. There's a lot of uncertainty across the board, though.
Think about this, and I was looking back at the Seahawks. Again, they kind of had the breakthrough last year. They went 9-9, but I don't think I just now realized this, but I think they lost to every NFC South team last year, despite going 9-9. Isn't that kind of to me? That's the ultimate, and maybe makes it even more of a wild card. I think about that. I'm they went 9-9, but they lost to every NFC South team. They went 0-4. They lost. Yeah, they lost 27-23 to the Falcons, 39-32 to the Saints, 21-16 to the Bucks, and 30-24 to the Panthers. It's just wild to think about. A team has a breakthrough and just could not break through against that division.
9 wins. So. 9 wins. 9-8 isn't, also sounds like less of a breakthrough now that I think about it. Yeah. It's that's fine, but with the draw they had with the way the division ended up shaking out, I don't know, man. And you're not going to have as easy of a schedule.
the better discussion on this is probably, again, going to come after the draft because we know how much that can change a lot of things. Because, let's think about the Seahawks, too. Here's one of the reasons why I would put them in that category. They have 2 top 20 picks right now, right? Yeah. They've got the 5th pick, and they've got the 20th pick. So when you factor that in, too, it's who knows? If they make the most of those picks, who maybe they package those picks and send them elsewhere, move up to get, I don't know. There's all those possibilities you could do with that. So I think that's just something. That's why, I don't know why, just initially – when I looked at the list, I talked about the Bears and the Raiders for different reasons, but I put the Seahawks on there because I think they're just one that I don't have a great read on yet because I think there's a lot to still be determined, especially because of what they have in the draft. So,
I trust John Schneider. At the end of the day for Seattle too, I think at times you can't replicate the success of when they got Chancellor and Sherman and Earl Thomas and all, drafting the Legion of Boom and having like that run of luck. But I think and analysis, but also some luck mixed in, even with Russell Wilson, how we looked into him. But overall, I still think Schneider's a really good GM, and the fact that, like you said, they could trade back, they could use some of these picks. I'm frightened of the idea of Will Anderson falling to them at 5. I would just, even though the Cardinals are still in the Rams division, Seattle a little more scary for me at this moment. So, I think that those reasons, that you kind of have the push and pull of the schedule being, in my opinion, looking at it how it stands at the moment, looks significantly tougher. Maybe it won't end up being so. But the roster getting, potentially still better. And then also, those, especially with the draft. I will say overall with over-unders, I definitely would wait until you get some of the Football Outsider projections. I think, we talked about the Eagles, but then after we just had the affirmation from them being like their number 2 or number 1 win total projected team. Sure enough, it played out that way. I think there are times where the perception that the public has and is a little bit different than the actual what the numbers look like and what the rosters look like and what the schedule again, I would strength of schedule. I'm saying all these things because that's kind of all we have to go off right now. But I would wait until you actually have projections to base the strength of schedule on, not so much what happened last season, because a lot of teams are going to flip flop. We saw teams again go from worst to first in their divisions or to second at least, making the playoffs. So it's a lot of uncertainty. But like you said, the draft will hopefully give us some clarity. The Lamar Jackson situation still being up in the air. At least it feels like the Aaron Rodgers one is kind of settled in. But still a lot of movement that could be happening. I think there could be some more trades for sure through the draft too. It could be a kind of a busy season, and maybe some of these teams at the bottom won't look so bad when we look at how their actual projections shake out, and maybe some teams at the top will have a little bit tougher. I know there a popular pick last year where people thought that the Bengals were a little too overrated, and then they proved everyone wrong and stayed great. I don't know if there's one right now that I see that's too overrated. Like even like the Bills at 10.5, that feels like that. Like they kind of went down. They kind of went down on the Bills, and I'm like, I'm taking that over. I'm sorry.
I was about to go there. All right. Team. So I was about to say, but we were going to wrap it up with this. I was going to say, all right, you have to pick one right now. You have to pick one of these numbers that you were. If you had to if somebody came to you and said you have to make a bet in the next 30 seconds, which one are you picking? And this was the one I identified as I was looking through this, but knowing I was going to ask you this question, I said I think I would go the Bills over 10.5. But of course, you're doing that with the mindset of understanding that right now is minus 140. So it's moving more towards that. If you bet the under, it's plus 115 because that's the money's not going towards the under. The money's going towards the over because that is, again, what I think makes sense. I think I would still do it, even at minus 140, because I think the Bills will play a tough schedule. But I looked at their schedule, pulled it up. I still think they get to 11 wins. So that's the one I would take. I guess since we both maybe just picked that, I'll find another one real quick to maybe go on. Let me find another one that it's a 30-second deal here, so I've got to find it in the next 15 seconds. I'm
looking too. I'll tell you mine after you go, but I'm going to make my pick in my head first, so I don't cheat with the time.
Okay, I'll go. I think I'll go Patriots over 7.5.
Gosh damn it. That's what I was going to say.
I think that's the next one.
I'll try to think of one more. Yeah, Patriots, like I said, they're for sure. When you said that before the podcast, I was like, that's 100% I would take the over there. No questions asked. Yeah. 7.5 is too low.
I think I'll go Patriots over 7.5. All right, so we're all in on the AFC East at this point.
Apparently, everyone's winning the AFC East. They're all making the playoffs. It's all great, which is not going to happen because that division, it's just too tough. It's just the harder thing is picking which of those 4 teams is going to, and that's where clearly right now they have the Patriots as the odd man out. I think they're going to find their way to wiggle in there and still be in the conversation.
I'll be honest, the team I'm looking at, if I had to pick an under one, maybe the Packers. Like I'm not even kidding. Like I think I would maybe look at that as a possibility. There's too many questions right now. I don't know. So
they're up there.
We'll see.
For sure. I think strength of schedule wise, where if I was confident in the health of Tua, I'd for sure pick the over for the Dolphins. Dolphins right now, second toughest schedule, just something to kind of be considered. But I think the Commanders having a top 10 tough schedule, I might take the under on them. Just
Yeah.
maybe they're gonna.
I was just about to mention. We said we were not going to mention every team. We said we probably would not get to every team. I think the Commanders were the last team that we had not mentioned. In this
we haven't talked about the Titans.
The Titans are the other one. Well, I may go under on the Titans, but I don't know. Like I think you're betting against Mike Vrabel, and usually, even if they don't, make a run, that's a tough one for me. I don't have a great.
That's a really tough one. Denver also. Derrick Henry. Yeah, we don't know what Derek. We haven't talked about the Broncos. That is maybe one of the harder ones, in my opinion. In that conversation, not quite there with the other teams we talked about, but
I told you before we started recording. I said I think I may go over on the Broncos, but boy, the thought of that offense last year, I cannot. It is like so ingrained in your mind that I don't know that even with Sean Payton there, I don't know that I can fully make a bet on the Broncos at this point. I think it's just not a good idea. And as you'll notice, if you look, I want to say I'm going to make sure this is still how it's on DraftKings. I know it is on one of our other lists here, but yes. So over 8.5 and under 8.5, both still valued at -110 right now. So essentially, I don't think anyone knows to do what's
right in the middle.
Broncos. Yeah. So you're not getting plus money on either side right now. So I don't know that anyone knows what to do with them, but.
They are, I think, one of the tougher ones for that reason. There's just so much uncertainty of what you want to be optimistic of Sean Payton and what he can do, and some of the talent. Their defense is still really good.
Yeah,
but you just don't know because it looked so bad last year. So
yeah, who knows? So we'll see. But there you go. We did somehow, I think, mention every team in the NFL.
Just about,
some thought regarding their win total. If we did not, I guarantee you we'll discuss your team again at some point this offseason. So, again, we got a lot of stuff on the way, getting ready for the draft, which will be here before you know it, and more moves still to be made, free agency-wide, trade-wise, all that. But, of course, Dylan, it's all covered over at ClutchPoints. Let everybody know they can find everything there.
Yeah, the ClutchPoints app, NFL section there. We have tons of content going on with, like, as you mentioned, the draft, some of the best free agent signings left, kind of grading overall free agency for each team. Basically, and obviously tons of coverage of all the Lamar Jackson stuff. So in the ClutchPoints app, in the NFL section, also the NFL section of ClutchPoints.com, tons of more draft content that's going to be coming out. We already went through kind of looking at some of the first-round picks, the best looks. We've had mock drafts routinely, every few weeks coming out. Tons of good stuff. And, I'm sure on here, probably as we get to April, we're only a month out from the draft now. We'll probably start doing some of our mock draft stuff, see if we'll do the same kind of setup as the past or something different. But, it should be a lot of fun. This is the moment now. Once we get past we're almost to the Final Four here for the NCAA tournament. We got opening day coming for baseball, but this is, for the football side, this is draft season. This is the time that we kind of dig in for the next month and try to have a lot of fun going into, looking at where all these guys are going to end up. There's a lot of, if you follow college football, I think that there's just so many fun names that, especially this year at the quarterback position after kind of last year where we took a second off. Now it feels like the intrigue is back, and there's a lot of things that could happen, a lot of movement still that could happen, even though we already had a trade for the number one pick.
Yep. A lot of stuff on the way. Again, it's all covered at ClutchPoints, but we'll have a lot more on the way here as we look ahead to all of that. And, of course, to get all that, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. And thanks, as always, for listening to the podcast. We'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.